it's an absolute honor to be able to speak to you because there was you, Chris Bangle, and Shiro Nakamura were the first famous car designers that I knew of before of any of the Italian greats, and I just it's an absolute honor to have you on the show. So thank you so much.
My pleasure.
Patrick, I want to start off with a quote that you said in one of your emails, that luck is not what you get, but what you do with it. Can you unpack that a little bit, please?
Yes, absolutely. I think that in life, almost everybody has opportunities that come before them, that one can either take up the opportunity and then do something about it, or one can just simply stay on the pavement and let the traffic go by. And I must say that personally, I find myself I believe that I'm a very lucky man, that I've had some wonderful opportunities. And when I look back on my career, I've noticed almost every time that I was coming to a point where I was saying, what am I going to do next? What's going to happen now? And then that would be the moment that I would be contacted by somebody. And each time I took the opportunity, and I've never actually looked back. So yes, I think you can basically you're sure that you're going to have luck in your life all the way through. Things are going to happen. Opportunities. You either take them up or you don't, and that's what I meant.
Patrick, you've been quite public about your father passing quite early on in your life. You lost him at 11 years old. You have an English mother, and she seemingly didn't really know what to do with you at the time, and felt that the best thing would be for you to attend school in England, and you obviously learned a lot of the English cultures, rugby, drinking, but not cricket somehow, which has kind of got nothing really to do with the question that I was going to ask, except that you studied at a seemingly unconventional place, which was Birmingham Institute of Art. Was Coventry established at that time or not?
Absolutely not. No. In fact, there were no automobile design-oriented schools open, bar, of course, in the United States, the Art Center. So I chose Birmingham quite simply because there was a professor there whose name was Naum Slutsky, and he had himself been a professor at the Bauhaus when he was a very young man, when he was 23. And the Bauhaus was a movement that I was extremely interested in from very, very early times. And I thought, well, this man is really in his last years of teaching. I mean, I think he must have been 70 years old, and still teaching. And so my selection was rapid. I said, okay, I'll go to Birmingham. And I didn't get the accent, by the way, so that was a good thing.
Tell me, how did you find out about him specifically? Because I guess that sort of information wasn't readily available.
I believe, if I recall right, because that's clearly a long time ago, that I had a sister who lived not very far from Birmingham, and she happened to send me an article in whatever it was, the Birmingham Post or whatever, which had been an interview of Naum Slutsky, and that was if I recall right, that was what actually prompted me to apply at the college. Yes.
Patrick, you seemingly knew quite a young age that you wanted to become a car designer, and yet you chose to go and study with this gentleman at in Birmingham. How obvious was it to you that that could be a path as opposed to maybe going to somewhere like Art Center? Because to some people it's super obvious, and I think certainly in those days, I mean, even when I was at university, a path like that wouldn't necessarily be that obvious, especially not without internet and all that sort of stuff. Did you have was there an alternative game plan if the car thing didn't work out?
Not really. It was either Birmingham or it might have been any of the other College of Arts in Great Britain, as I had studied in Great Britain from just after the death of my father. I wanted to continue in Great Britain, knowing that design education as such in France was at that time was very, very flaky, not very evident. It was very, very much art oriented. Now, I knew, of course, that going to a college like Birmingham and knowing about Naum Slutsky's background, I foresaw that it was not going to be evident to be doing some car design, and of course that was the case, which basically Naum Slutsky just felt that anything to do with car design was car styling, and you weren't allowed to actually mention the dirty word, and in fact, if you even mention the name of Raymond Loewy, who was very well known at the time, but was very, commerce oriented. He said the best looking curves are the sales curves, and now Slutsky as a designer was really very much in the continuity of the Bauhaus, which was a mixture of mixing architects, designers, artists, and it did have this notion of having a social approach. It cared about people, and anything which was related to what some considered to be superficial styling was clearly not something that you did. So basically, I knew that if I had mentioned car design or car styling, I would have been asked to go and rinse my mouth out, and also that it would result in doing sketches in the evening, and this is what I did. I continued to do. We were there was three of us, in fact, at college, who were oriented towards car design. There was Trevor Creed, who eventually became the vice president of design at Chrysler. There was another fellow whom I forgot his name. He was the best talented of us three, but he had a real problem leaving Yorkshire. He eventually got hired by Ford, but he couldn't. The idea of leaving Yorkshire was just like going to I don't know, Afghanistan or something. So he only
North
stayed
Korea.
a few months. But yes, there was only three of us, and we compared our sketches, but hiding, nobody was to see you.
What exactly? I mean, what exactly were you guys doing to familiarize yourself with the process of the car design way of doing things? I mean, and I mean specifically with regard to illustration and presenting your ideas.
We had amongst the teachers a teacher who was really very clever, very competent in terms of illustrations. He helped us to master illustrations. But having said that, by comparison to what I learned later, particularly working with a highly professional designer later on in my life, when I began in earnest car design, it was still kind of rigid illustrations which didn't have any feeling of movement. It was made, to illustrate coffee pots and saucepans and stamping machines, but we made do. We did a lot of sketching, and that was kind of that was good. But I must say that illustrations were, when I looked upon, I've got rid of all of them, but I did find some a few years ago, and I thought, oh my God, it's just so awful.
Well, I think especially today, right? Because the level of just even like graduates are just, in terms of illustration, I'm not necessarily talking about the thinking, but just in terms of communicating ideas visually is just, it's very impressive. It's very impressive. But, with that comes sometimes a lack of thinking. And I get the impression that your experience with Noam Slutsky was very much an intellectual one, and I guess that probably informed a lot of your career choices, and also your the way that you do things, and you are definitely a strategist, that's for sure. I mean, amongst many other things, and I guess
so.
Well,
I guess so. Yes, I think that Noam Slutsky helped me to set my mind right, and to ask all the questions. And even today, I continuously use some of the approaches that were born around that time, of asking the right questions and trying to really understand. But what sometimes some refer to a Japanese technique, which is asking 5 times why, which is to get to the core analysis, to the core thing. Oh, this is this and that, and then you say why, and the guy says, and you say why, and eventually you really understand what is behind a statement. So this kind of approach, that very, very much is something that one found in the Bauhaus approach, and Slutsky really taught us that. If I may also,
absolutely.
Sorry, may I just add one thing which I wrote in a story, just to give you a better understanding of the man. That one day we were doing, we were in a life class, because we did, we did a lot of drawing and life classes, and we were going, we were starting on this, and he came in and he said, stop, stop. Today we're going to do something different. I don't want you to draw the model. I want you to draw the spaces between things, between the model and the window and so on, to reconstruct and this, I think, was a way to understand that there was not just one reality. For example, I mean, I've done this with some of my students on doing a still life, and I ask them not to draw the Kleenex box and the bottle and the vegetable, but to draw the actual spaces between them. And then in that way you reconstruct, but it's another world. And that I find intellectually extremely stimulating.
That's a very interesting concept. I've never heard of that before. I mean, I've obviously we know. I mean, we talk about negative space all the time, which I guess is similar but not exactly the same as what you are referring to there. That's super interesting.
You're absolutely right. But I've worked on, and in fact, in later years, I did some conferences in China. I was invited by the SAE, Society of Automobile Engineers, China, and I did some very interesting experiments on collective drawing. I'm not sure whether we have the time for me to explain. Tell me, Sam,
Yeah,
can I
absolutely.
explain that?
Go for it.
Take,
As long
a
as
few
you
minutes.
want. No, as long as you want. There's no rush.
Okay.
Super laid back. Take your time.
Okay. I have this ideal that has always been inside me, is to develop collective creativity. I love what Enzo Ferrari said. He said, teamwork has replaced the solitary genius. And I just love that idea. And we know that in our business, in automobile design, when you think about a vehicle that is designed or the interior or whatever, in reality, there is not one man or one woman. It's always a group of people. So many contribute. And so I devised this exercise, which I first began to teach in the school which I'm involved in. And I also taught it in the architect's agency, the office where I work. And then I did all these experiments in China. And it's quite simple. Mainly, what I do is I get in a room, I have tables where you have 4 people, okay? And no more than 4. And on each of these tables, I put a composition. And I go back to the same objects I mentioned a moment ago. I say a cube, which can be a Kleenex box, a bottle, and then I'll say a vegetable. And then often I will say, okay, what have you got in your pocket? And somebody will come out, of course, with a bunch of keys or whatever. And then we add that. And that makes a composition. And then I put the students or the people who participate, for the table, so at each quarter. And then I say, okay, we're going to do some very fast sketch exercise. And when I say fast, I mean, I'm going to time you 5 minutes. And the first 5 minutes for the first exercise, I just want you to sketch and to put in these objects in a perspective on your sketchbook. So, I time them. I say, okay, stop. Now, for the next 5 minutes, I'm going to ask you to do some very, very, improving the overall perspective, making it somewhat more detailed and more precise. Okay, 5 minutes. And then afterwards, I say, okay, now I want you to put a little bit of shade, but only in these parts, And so I'm descriptive. Each time I say, 5 minutes. So we've done the exercise, and what do? We then take the drawings and we put it on the wall. And then we look at the sketches, and then you can tell there's one guy who's really good, and there's also one guy who is not quite as good in the group, and then you might, okay. And then I say, okay, now we're going to start again after break. We're going to start again the exercise. All right, fellow, same thing. You start, clean sheet of paper. You start and draw, the first 5 minutes. And then the guys do, okay, we're doing the same damn exercise again. All right, And then they do the first 5 minutes. And I say, okay, now, guys, what I want you to do is leave your sketch, okay? And just move one spot. So you're going to be drawing on the sketch of somebody else, all right? So I've got these 4 guys just move one step. And then I say, okay, we start now the second operation. Okay, stop, 5 minutes. Now move one seat again. And then we do the third operation, and then we go on and do the fourth operation. Now, what comes out of this? What's very interesting? You then take the 4 illustrations, you put it on the wall. What do you observe? You observe that they're all pretty damn good, okay? But they're all different. Why? Is because the first person who did the first lines on the paper determines what is going to happen. But that was my way of trying to interpret Enzo Ferrari's phrase, teamwork replaces the solitary genius. So I taught that in China there was a room where there was 100 students. Well, not quite 100. There were 90 students and there were 10 teachers, and they all did the exercises, and they were so damn excited. They just loved the thing. And now it's something which is taught. But anyway, it's something which I call collective drawing. So continuously through my career, I've tried to invent ways of promoting creativity, of just getting people to think. I've got other examples later when I was in a company when I would be talking to a designer and I said, hey, this is really interesting that that seat you're doing and that IP. It looks, it got a little bit of influence from Ross Lovegrove. And the guy would look, blank face, Ross Lovegrove, And I find that so often is the case that automobile designers are auto obsessed. And they're so obsessed with automobiles that they don't look what is happening around them. And so as a result, we invented something which was called transmission, missions. What I liked about the word is that you could hear it phonetically as being transmissions, but it could also be transmission.
Yes.
And what we did is we sent a group of 6 or 7 designers. They were accompanied. There was no managers, but they had a kind of a cultural guide or somebody who could would know where they were going. And then the first one we went to Milan, to the famous fair, and basically they would be taken in the fair, and then they would be sat together at when they were having a drink and making a kind of a recording, what they had seen, what they felt was interesting. And so eventually we did these programs, and we said, well, this is the such a year transmission. And when the designers came back home to the design center, I would then get them to make a conference to the rest of the designers. Oh, this is what we saw, guys, and so on and so forth. And we did, in fact, videos. And one day I was talking to President, and I said, we've been doing this now since a year, and we've done some really quite interesting coverages. I mean, we went to Milan, but we went to other places. We would go to IKEA in Scandinavia. We would go, different places. And he said to me, "Oh yeah, why don't you just send me a couple, And then eventually he came back to me and said, "Hey, these are great. Do you have any others, And eventually we created this thing within the company that we, the design department, were feeding the rest of the company with what was happening in the outside world. And the designers were no more in this situation of not knowing what the hell was happening in architecture or what was happening in the field of graphics. And this was, again, getting this collaborative, collective creativity developed for all the designers, and not, as you do have sometimes, you might have a designer who's interested in architecture, great, but he's not necessarily going to share all this. So this is the way that I've worked. And by the way, I still do that now.
I definitely share that sentiment of at least historically, traditionally, of car designers being car obsessed and not looking further beyond. It's always trendy and popular to use buzzwords like, say, oh, I'm really inspired by architecture or product design or whatever. But often when you scratch below the surface, they aren't looking in any of those places. It's just something to. No. It's just lip service, and but I think I think now. Especially with like young designers now, I think that's a lot less the case. which is obviously a positive thing. At least that's what that's what I think, and that's what I've experienced. But yeah, carry on.
Well, I was just going to say, Sam, that what I find is that today I work in yachts, okay, and I find that when we are working for a new client or for a company with whom we worked for a long time, um, we have a certain approach, where we try to ask all the right questions. We say what it is and what it is not, which is based upon another exercise that I've brought on the scene. And we do mood boards. Okay, mood boards are now something which was mostly done by the color and trim in the past in the automobile industry. But in the design business that I'm involved in, uh, we have designers who always use mood boards, and it's one of the things to whet their appetites, because when they're doing mood board to try to get inspiration from the world outside, by definition, it will not stay only in the automobile business. Now, I can guarantee that on all the mood boards that we have, we might and probably will definitely have a car. We might have a detail of a car, but we also have architecture, product design, graphic design, and so on and so forth. And I'm, back to the Bauhaus thing. The Bauhaus was a movement which involved all these different disciplines, and this is at the root of my approach to design is not to design with blinkers, basically.
Patrick, we'll come back to your early career in a minute, but on the subject of the whole Bauhaus thing and the inspiration and the influence that Noam, for example, had on you, when you look at Renault and you look at Citroën, they are both unmistakably French, yet there seems to be a sensibility with regard to Renault design that is sometimes maybe lacking is not the right word to refer to that with Citroën, but with Citroën there's a flamboyance that sometimes is very difficult for me to understand. Given the amount of time that you were in charge of Renault, do you trace that back to your mentorship from Noam?
Well, part of it, but the other is basically when I joined the company because I liked Renault and I liked what they represented. And when I got hired by the president of the time, a name called Raymond Levy, um, we came to an agreement, that basically I was hired to fire up um, the creativity within the design department. It was called styling, and I asked for it to be changed to design, because to me, design is from cradle to grave, and it's not just a guy who arrives with a tool at one stage and then just tries to improve what was very much the case in Renault, which is basically to dress up the hunchback. But we then what I liked about Renault was the fact that throughout the post-war they had been responsible for some extraordinarily intelligent vehicles. Namely, you take the R4, which was the first vehicle to be produced with a tailgate,
Yes.
and then you go to the R16, not a nice looking car, but R16, with a flat glass and no curvature and so on. But R16, which was extremely interesting from the interior, with a modular interior, which in fact went berserk in terms of the different possibilities that you could use it. And then you move on again, and then you have the R5, which was the first car with these plastic bumpers, which changed the world of automotive because it made each time it makes sense. There is intelligence behind it. These bumpers, these plastic bumpers, enable you to be able to drive in Paris and not totally not totally ruin your car. And then later you move on, and then you've got the espace, and then it continued. And basically, my mission was to continue and come and try to bring back the days of the great concepts. So I've been very much oriented towards concept development and work or try to work on ideas which makes sense. When people see it, say, "Hey, that's cool. That's cool. That's great. Look, hey, look, it can also do that," and so on. You take the Twingo and you're at the supermarket. You open the tailgate, and then you just bend, and then you could slide the seat forward, and all these things which make sense. I think it might be presumptuous if I say which are intelligent, but I must say that this is the way I feel. Citroën is something else. Citroën is a phenomenal company, wonderful company. I could have joined them. I could have joined, but despite the fact that I admired greatly some of the things which they had done at the time, which was clearly the DS19 and so on and so forth. They also did some pretty horrific thing at the same time, but very very unusual and unusually ugly, unusually ugly. Yes, but they were indeed very flamboyant. They were very flamboyant, and I've known some of the people who work there who were in fact great designers, great stylists to some extent, and they also had they had this fantastic engineer. Lefebvre was his name. Is it Gabriel Lefebvre? I can't remember, but who was in fact a man that came from the auto manufacturer Voisin, the Voisin automobile, and he is the man who is behind the 2CV, the traction avant, and also the DS. So I like what they did, but they were technologically oriented. They were also very flamboyant in terms of styling, but they were not oriented towards what I liked also in car design, was this notion of intelligence. Coming up with within a given space, provide many opportunities, and this modular approach. All these things they were the things that fascinated me.
I always got that from Renault designers. The thinking about it. There was a lot of product design thinking in a lot of the concepts, which I could really appreciate, and that's again I try not to speak about this too publicly because I feel quite ignorant on French design as a whole. But with like Citroën, for example, it's a brand that I never got, and I kind of made a bit of a fool of myself by saying that I'm not really a big fan of the DS. I mean, I can appreciate it, but it's but some of the other things that Citroën have done have been flamboyant for the sake of being flamboyant, and there was a sensibility for me in Renault design. I mean, especially in the late 90s, early 2000s, but I guess that's kind of carried on as well. I mean, if you look at something like the Megane with the triangular bum, I mean, this was, when you look at it, there's immediate, it's French somehow, but there was a kind of a Bauhaus sensibility to the execution, which I could really appreciate.
No, it's true. I think that in more recent years, probably they become less French in some ways. But of course, there's been an awful lot of designers that have left and gone to other companies. But I'm not. I don't believe that they are actually pursuing today Frenchness. I think there's remnants within the design center, which means there is a continuity. But I think basically today they really want to appeal as much as possible to as big a public as possible. And well, I think Frenchness is far less evident today than it was, 30 years ago or whatever. I think that's or
Yeah, yeah.
40 years ago for that matter. Yeah.
But I think it's across the board, right? It's not just in the French companies. I mean, that's everywhere pretty much. It's very much a global market now. So, okay.
Yeah,
Uh,
absolutely.
Patrick, I'm gonna ask you about some things that I've never really asked anybody else. It's to do with some of the people that you've hired over the years. You have and I believe this is pretty calculated, been successful at assembling a phenomenal group of people together. Before we get to Renault, I want to ask you about two people in particular when you were at Volkswagen. One of them was Axel Bruyn, and the other one is Pierre Blanche. And what I found super interesting about both of those guys is that they didn't come in through the traditional means. They both, I mean, like Pierre basically showed, as I understand, Pierre showed up at your door and he kind of was like, I've got a flight in a couple of hours. I need to see you now. And Axel was like, had this whole big convoluted story that he told your secretary at the time and got his way in. Maybe let's start with Axel, for example, given that he didn't even have a design education at the time. Can you recall that hiring him?
Oh yes, very much so. I recall hiring both guys, and in the same way that I, later on when I was at Renault, and particularly for the first, let's say the first 10 years, I actually hired each individual. In the case of Volkswagen, at the time, I had joined Volkswagen, and I was earmarked to become the first head of the group design. It didn't exist at the time. There was only three brands: Volkswagen, Audi, and Seat. And I was hired by the president of the company to become the very first head of those three companies. But to start with, despite the fact that I had a title which clearly positioned me higher up the ladder than the other fellows in the three companies, I opened a satellite studio, and I chose to go to Düsseldorf because it was very far from Wolfsburg. And at the time, in Wolfsburg, my boss, I knew that he if I had gone to where he wanted me to go, which was right, Hanover, he would have been there every evening, And so I moved to Düsseldorf because that was that was and is the fashion city of Germany, probably Munich as well today. So I set up this little studio. It wasn't a very big studio, and I hired individuals. Now I was very fortunate because I brought quite a few remarkable clay modelers from Ford, and I had a studio engineer, and I had also an executive designer came with me, and then we started hiring different fellows, and I followed my hunches, which is the one which I've done, over the years. Of course, I'm looking for automobile designers, very competent and so on. but I also like, I won't say oddballs, but I really do like to hire people who are not necessarily fit in a box. And in fact, in one of the stories I told in my book, it's to do with bad boys. And basically, I think that within a team, just if I just can develop this point, if you continuously hire people who are just going to fit in beautifully within the team, what you're doing basically is you're hiring somebody who is exactly the same as the next guys, and then this person that you've hired, he will lunch with all the others every day, be reading the same magazines, will be not living too far, going to the same shops, and so you've got clones. And what I wanted is and that's why I wrote them. This is part of my design theory that apart from these wonderful people, you also have to have bad boys. I guess today I could add bad girls, but get bad girls sounds a bit different there. But bad boys, people are just totally different, totally different. And that came Axel Bryan. And Axel Bryan hadn't studied automobile design, but he was a very well-established, fabulous illustrator.
Incredible.
And he did this for magazines. And I could just see from the rendering, you knew that the guy had talent, and you knew the guy understood 3D, and and that he had a real feeling for shape, for form, for for feeling. And so I said, yeah, we just gotta hire this guy. He may not have done that, but studied. On the other hand, he had built himself, a car, absolutely mad thing, and so to me, he was a kind of a natural. I'm not sure whether Axel with whom I'm still very much friendly, will accept that I call him a bad boy, but I love the fact that he came from somewhere else, and of course, he's developed into a remarkable designer and had a very beautiful, brilliant career. So that was that was Axel.
And tell me about Pierre showing up on your doorstep.
Okay. Before moving on to Pierre, let me just say one thing, by the way.
Yes.
Axel was quite remarkable because in our studio where we were doing design strategy and thinking about SEAT and so on, so the future. Some of the illustrations that Axel did were just so mind blowing that this really helped us to promote design strategy, which was basically what I had been hired for. Pierre. Now I understood later, that. He was very much in a hurry. He tried to see me. I really was always very free. I was in this studio in Düsseldorf. I didn't, I used to go once a month or something like that up to Wolfsburg and then to Ingolstadt. But basically I wrote my agenda. And my secretary thought the guy was interesting. She probably thought he was good looking, actually. But anyway, she said, "Yeah, I think he's free, within the next hour or whatever." And then I saw the fellow, and another bad boy. The guy just was so. Coherent in his thinking, or incoherence. I'm not sure. Whatever, but he jumped from one thing to the next. You could see the guy was really thinking, and of course he was he had a different experience again. Something different. And since I already had a few automobile designers from America, I think one of the guy was from Malaysia, but we had as always in my design groups, always very international groups. Okay, always. At Renault, I had 26 different nationalities. More than half were foreigners, or non-French. They're not foreigners; they're non-French. Uh, so Terre Blanche just fitted in perfectly. He was this round plug in a square hole.
Yes,
It's
yes.
just exactly what I was looking for. So it was just absolutely built up a terrific team as a result.
I hope the question isn't too like I don't know, seemingly pointless, but it's very clear to me that, I mean, you go on to the team that you established at Renault, and it's absolutely incredible. And I've spoken to both Axel and Pierre, and they've obviously gone on to have phenomenal careers, and I've heard it from their perspective, but it's super interesting to hear as well about the person on the receiving end of that, i.e. yourself. And when you consider that they were, I mean, especially with the conservative German company like Volkswagen, I mean, nobody else would have hired those guys. And that's why
No.
I ask you. So,
Yeah. No, you're right. Anyway, the questions to me are not the questions that I'm asked normally, and that is great, because these are some of the subjects which really, I feel impassioned about. I'm very, very a human related person. I love the people. I love working with people. I like creating teams. I like to interface. I like to create, brainstorming sessions and all these things. So these questions to me are very pertinent. They're just perfect.
It was very much the ethos of this podcast in general, when I started it, because there was, there's a lot of questions that don't necessarily get asked to people like yourself. There's always very specific questions about what were you thinking when you came up with the concept for the Twingo, and things like that. And there's value in that, but those questions have been asked, and I just feel like we kind of at a watershed moment where the landscape is changing so much, and some of those initiatives that people like Axel and Pierre displayed when they showed up on your doorstep, there's a lot to learn and a lot of value that can be taken out of these instances that it's just simply not taught at university, or any school for that matter.
No, absolutely. My experience has been, of course, to hire professional individuals, guys who would, either had a long experience in another company or something, or had come out of one of the good design schools. But as I said before, I was always on the lookout for oddball kind of individuals or girls, and I feel very strongly about this. To me, it's one of the more important chapters that I wrote in my book, Design Between the Lines. This notion of the search for the bad boys, those who are not going to fit in, and who are not, when you hire an individual like that, you are not in the thought process, is he going to fit in? Is he going to fit in the team? Oh, yes, he's exactly all the others. Oh, that's great, wonderful. So we can expect exactly the same as the others. So, you bring this guy, and first of all, he has an interface. Of course, it has happened to me that I had to fire one, okay, because he was creating havoc.
Yes.
One day I arrived on making a fifth scale model, and the modeler was crying, and I said, okay, what's up, what's up, whatever, Fred or whatever. And then I started to unwind, and I realized, then I started being very alert, and I found that one of the guys was just an awful pest,
Yes.
And in terms of human relation, that was just absolutely unacceptable. So I fired him. He probably is going to be listening to this podcast, because he's still very much of a practicing designer. But he did actually say to me on a social network, He didn't actually said the word, but he said, I had some things that happened in my career which really provoked some changing in the way that and I knew that he was talking to me about when I fired him.
Right.
But anyway, I really do try to bring these people from various places and people who are going to have this interface, different interface with those, and they're going to stimulate the rest of the team. I found that in design teams, the most cultivated, cultured people are the people in color and trim because
Wow.
they are not obsessed in purely automobile, and as a result, they have a far greater, look on the outside. And so I've always listened a lot to color and trim. And in fact, when I joined Renault, I made color and trim a separate department, and the person was made a director. And it was not somebody working for interior, but I wanted initially to really show my support and my respect for color and trim, because behind color and trim, there's much more than colors and trim. There's often philosophy, this opening to the world. They're the ones that were able to establish what are the trends happening in the outside world in various fields of design. So yeah, I take the opportunity of taking my hat off there to them.
Um, Patrick, with regard to sorry to go back, but with regard to some of the bad boys, so to speak, or bad girls that you've hired, do you have you just historically gone, I'm gonna give this person the benefit of the doubt and see how it pans out, and if they screw up, I'll just have to rectify it later. I mean, because you can't control this person, or do you go in with the notion of, I think I'll be able to tame them?
No, certainly not. But I do try, even though I might have made the mistake, a couple of times, of not hiring somebody who's antisocial. That the guy is aggressive or whatever.
Yes, yes,
But
yes,
as I said, what I've always been looking for is within a team that there should be a certain number who are, come from a totally different horizon, has a different
yes.
vision, and they definitely, as a result, will have an influence on the rest of the team. Uh, yes, there is a guesswork. There is an evaluation, and basically, when I was doing, in the first 10 years or whatever, when I was doing the interviews, basically, of course, I wanted to know what each individual, how good he was in terms of his design skill. Okay, but I also wanted to really understand what the guy was or the girl in terms of themselves, as an individual. How deep were they? Was it something that you could just poke your finger through? That namely there was nothing. There was like a facade. Like a cowboy film background. No, I'm looking for real people, and basically this is what I've practiced all these years. Trying to get these teams together of individuals. I've hired incredible people. Just absolutely amazing people who've had fantastic careers. Some who have, there's an awful lot of them now who are ahead of various design centers around the world, and I have to say that I'm rather proud of that, because on top of that, most of them, well, I would say all of them, are very nice individuals, real human beings. And this is why they're successful, because as a result, they attract people from outside. What I don't like, just to understand, I disliked. I won't name the guy because but there was in General Motors. I will go as far as that, and people in General Motors who may still be around would know. But there was a head of an activity who was just absolutely, he was a brilliant individual and brilliant designer himself. But when he walked into a room, he was violent. He would tear drawings off, take their shit out, this and so on, and showing absolutely no respect. Now, I don't want to hire people who later would become that kind of individual. To me, that has nothing to do with the creative process. That is sort of authoritarian. I mean, who wants that kind? Who wants to work
it's
in this
poisonous.
kind of
No,
environment?
it's poisonous.
It's just, it's poisonous. Yeah,
Yes.
absolutely. That's the right word.
I think that's the big differentiator. Is like is working out, who's got something about them that doesn't necessarily conform, but is not a prima donna doing displaying the kind of behavior that you've just described. Because there's a big difference between those two things, and I think that and I also, I despise that kind of like, oh, I'm brilliant, so I can just get away with speaking to everybody like shit, and then God forbid that person should get any form of authority. That just reinforces their notion, their self-importance, and their intuition that what I'm doing and the way that I'm doing it is right, and I could do whatever I want and people would just put up with it. And I couldn't be it's such a short-sighted mentality, and I've got no time for it.
But I've met quite a few, I've met
Yeah,
quite a
I
few,
know.
in the past, I've met these kind of individuals who showed no respect, who might. A very dear friend of mine was telling me about when he started in General Motors, and he was in this in this room with one other person who was his supervisor, and Ali Earl came in, and Ali Earl said to the supervisor, "What do you think he was thinking of when he drew this rear fender?" And then the supervisor would ask him, the designer, "What were you thinking of when you did the rear fender?" And then the designer would reply, "Well, actually, I was looking at some shapes which look very much like this." And then the supervisor would say, "Well, in fact, Mr. Earl, he was designing something."
Oh God! So
Why?
you weren't
Because
allowed to
he
address
was
him
too little
directly.
to talk to God. You
Oh
couldn't address the
God!
man. I mean,
Wow!
can you imagine? The world has changed. The world has
Yeah,
changed.
yeah,
But
yeah.
it just shows you the kind of attitudes. Now, this is the most the most extreme. But I've had to do with some pretty nasty individuals in my time.
I'm sure. I'm sure.
I mean, when I was a designer and I had a boss, and really awful individuals.
But Patrick, who were the guys? There must have been some, not a mentor or at least a role model that you might have looked up to and said, actually, you don't have to be an arsehole to get to the top. Who was?
Well, clearly there's one person above all, and that's Uwe Bansen. Uwe Bansen,
He was your boss at Ford.
Originally, he was my boss at Ford. When I joined Ford of Britain, I wanted to go to Ford of Germany because I'd lived many years in Britain, so I wanted a change. And when I arrived in Britain, Uwe Bansen was there, and he was in fact chief of interior at the time, and he was the man that who was my boss. So I had two individuals in between, a manager and then an executive designer. But I really just admire the man, and I admire him for many reasons. And one of the reasons was that he acted like a manager, namely, he did not behave like an artist. And the reason why I say an artist is that when I was a young designer in Ford of Britain, I had a boss who often went to the pub at lunchtime with one of the managers, and they would come back and they would never arrive on time, and they probably had one for the road too many. And we might have a meeting, and then I would be the designer who would be accompanying them, and I was in the meeting, and then the head of the chairman of the meeting, let's say, he would be looking at his watch, and he would say, "Oh dear, okay, look, we'll wait another 10 minutes until the artists arrive, then we can begin." And I said, "Well, when I'm the boss, that is just not going to happen." And I was really, really impressed by Uwe Barnson, who, apart from human qualities, was just, so absolutely perfect on timing. Everything was correct and well organized, well thought out. I got on just famously with him. And in fact, he gave me a big chance, which was the following. I had been there, a year and a half, I don't know. And he asked me to come in his office, which was, unusual because, then I was just a young designer and he was the big boss, chief designer or director of interior design. And he said, I would like to give you an opportunity to further your studies and to attend what is now called Anglia Ruskin University, in which part of Cambridge, to do a diploma in business administration. And I thought, and he basically he had spotted me. I don't know why. I think I was very much looked upon as being a bit of an oddball in being a little too maybe very doing too advanced designs, maybe not having my feet on the ground, and I would do sort of spaceship kind of technology, in line with what I had done at college. My diploma was very much like that. But anyway, he offered me this opportunity, which translated in my having, going to college 1.5 days per week, having to work every damn weekend to be able to keep up, because it was not an easy subject. But the thing is that the reason why I accepted is that right from day one, when I joined the company, I felt that my mission in life as a designer was to make design progress. And I think any of the individuals that you will meet who have worked with me probably will tell you that I really worked on promoting the position of design within a company, whatever the company I was in, and to make them recognize as being not just sketch artists, but thinking individuals, and that designers also should be involved in the strategy of the company. So I calculated, I said, okay, this is really, really going to be painful because I'm going to be doing all these studies, and it's going to be a lot of hard work, but it will be something which will be known within the company. Oh, did you know, by this guy, and as a result, to take me more seriously, And so I found, to me, that was kind of an investment in the future, but it was also an investment into the future of design. I really mean that, I've really, really worked on this, on making designers recognized as being not just illustrators for marketing.
It's unquestionable what you've done, not only at Renault, but like for the industry at large. I mean, you were the first design director to report directly to a CEO, for example. So, that we'll get into that in a second. I wanted to know, based on that, like whether or not it was very much a plan from day one. I don't want to hang around in the middle. I want to go right to the top. Was that very much the plan from day one?
I don't know, actually. All I know is that when I joined Ford in Britain, I discovered Trevor Creed, who later, went to the US and then left Ford to become the head of Chrysler. And we were highly competitive already when we were at college because we both went, to Birmingham. And so when I met him at Ford, I was kind of startled, and so there was quite a competition between us, and the competition was, to be identified as being, a thinking designer. At one point in time, we were given the opportunity of contributing to a Capri facelift or Capri reskin, I can't remember. And there was a competition between the two of us, and we did sketch work, and then we did, what was done at the time, these tape drawings which scraped your fingers, and you could, eventually you would have blood on your fingers. And I won, and I got into exterior. And then after that, I must say this sort of competition was not so much to getting to the top as being ahead of Trevor Creed.
Okay. Wow. Okay. And success was then like a byproduct of that. Yes.
Yes. Yeah.
Wow.
Kids.
It's really interesting. So I guess like that moment. I mean, having also to go back to Uwe Bansen, that was by the sounds of things very instrumental to your development.
Very much so. He basically followed me as I was developing with the company. So I was in Britain, and then I moved on to Germany on a foreign service assignment, and it was a time when Bob Lutz, who became a very famous executive in the industry, was a very much of a car guy, former Navy pilot, a man who spoke I don't know how many languages, and amongst others, he actually spoke the design language, and he could draw. He could also draw pretty well,
Hate those guys.
But he was good. He was really, really good. I still converse with him, And anyway, but at one time, Uwe Bansen was in the running. It was just at the time of the Fiesta development, the first Fiesta. And basically, Uwe Bansen's made the biggest contribution to that project. And then when the time came up to choose a vice president, he was bypassed, and they put an American designer instead, Jack Telnack, a US designer. And Uwe Bansen, felt like there was a kind of a glass ceiling, and he was really, being extremely sad, and he was talking to Bob Lutz, and in fact, it was Bob Lutz who told me the story a few years later, and we became friends and so on, and even outside of Ford when I left. But basically, he said to Bob, it looks as if I'm never going to make it. There's a glass ceiling. I'm a German. Clearly, they Ford only want to have Americans. And Bob Lutz said, no, that's not the case. Your problem is that you don't have anybody to replace you. He said, I tell you, all through my career, said Bob, whenever I joined a company, I immediately looked or hired or surrounded myself with people who were better than me and who could replace me, because that meant that I could be promoted, which is kind of clever, approach. And he said, so, no, you haven't. And he said, and Uwe Bansen said, but yes, look, I've got, and he quoted a name. He said, look, he's a very nice guy, but come on, damn well he can't replace you. And he said, there's only one person who can replace you, and you know who it is. And that's Patrick Quément. At the time, I was a senior, grade 10 or whatever it was, supervisor, not even a manager. And so suddenly my career just changed. I was sent to Great Britain, and then I'm just moved very, very rapidly through the ranks. Coming back to Germany as an executive, and then I was made a chief designer, and that enabled to free up Uwe Barnson to become vice president. So it, Bob told me the whole story,
Wow.
and I managed to really understand how things had developed. And in fact, towards the end of my career at Ford, I was sent to the United States to be groomed to become his replacement. But then some of the things didn't go as well as I wanted, and I left. And I was just when I was a bit despondent, I got contacted by the head of Volkswagen, who asked me if I was interested and so on and so forth, and then I moved on. Yeah.
Patrick, what is the best approach for somebody wanting to, I don't know, position themselves for the kind of career that you've had without losing integrity and self-respect? I mean, to put it crassly, like, how do you do it without brown nosing?
Well, I've never done that. I think that people who've known me always said that I was pretty independent, and I continued. And I was talking to somebody on a video conference, not a program, and saying, in my life, I've really taken quite a few really big risks, So that wasn't me, but I think brown nosing is, yes, some people can get promoted, but I think as an individual, you have to believe in yourself and your potential. You have to accept that at a given point in time, you have not reached your full development intellectually and in terms of thinking, and that you are continuously working to improve your competence, your understanding, and that as time goes by, you become a lot more interested in not just designing a beautiful product, but also, to apply your thinking on how do you contribute to the building up of the brand, how to, what are the on the management side, all these things that will make you more added value to the company. And I think that is, I was given this incredible opportunity of doing a master's in business administration, but there are many other ways as well. What is important is not just to become a super expert in your domain. You have continuously to look at other areas where you can contribute. And, for example, wherever I've gone, I've always been, I've always accepted or even said, I might be able to contribute to this when there is a cross-disciplinary team in a company working on something. To say, I did this when I was in Ford. I did this also when I joined Renault. I was given unbelievable responsibility. But all of this was because people saw that I was interested. I was interested in not just my little field, but I was interested in other things. And that's the reason why I've fought so long for design to be design, to be called design. In Germany, when I was at Ford, it was not called design; it was called Formgestaltung, which means but it means maker of shape. So basically that's the equivalent of styling. And so this fighting for creating a design department meant that the designers they come in right at the start. They don't wait for everything to be given to them, and then they just have to dress up the hunchback. They got to be up. They got to be up market, listening to, or to be involved in all these things. So that's my recommendation. To look out and take the blink. Get rid of the blinkers. Look outside.
Okay, here's another scenario then. If you are, for example, doing what you think, you're doing everything you can to advance in your career, and you kind of get the notion that, so I think the hardest thing is identifying this in the first place, but coming to the realization that it doesn't matter what you do, you are not going to be recognized, or your face doesn't fit, or whatever the case is. What to do in a situation like this? And maybe before you answer that, how to identify it, because that's the most important thing. I've got a friend, for example, I definitely will not mention him here, but he, for example, can't get past that glass ceiling that you talked about, and he somehow doesn't recognize that he can be there another 10 years and he will not get anywhere. So how to identify it in the first place, and then what to do with the situation?
Well, I think the answer is very, I would say, very simple. But it's not something which everyone is going to be able to see. I think that you have to be able to position yourself in a sort of realistic manner where you are within the company. You can look at people who are about the same age, who have the same experience and so forth. If you find that, for some reason that you're in the slow lane, you can do a few things. You can say, okay, now why am I in the slow lane? And ask, and somebody say, well, yeah, but you have this problem, and you can try to solve it. But at one point in time, you have to say, okay, well, if it's not going to work out, it's not going to work out. I leave, and then you take an opportunity. So I think in today's environment, that people are kind of leaving a bit too often, and I've seen some CVs and so on where, I was looking at guys, it was sort of 1.5 years here and 2 years there and so on. That may not look good, but when you have somebody who's been at it for 5 years or 4 years, and you can feel that it's not happening, that a glass ceiling really does exist, then it's time to get your things in your bag and move.
Wow. Okay, that's really powerful advice. I think it's difficult sometimes in this moment to kind of look at it objectively, if you're in that situation yourself, but looking at your peers, for example, as you've just said, that's probably quite a good barometer as to whether or not it's happening. So that's some great advice. Patrick, I want to ask, you've made a post before about meeting. We can talk about meeting Steve Jobs, and I don't know anyone that has met him, at least not to my knowledge anyway. Can you tell me a little bit about that meeting?
Yeah, absolutely. They're out of the blue. We got contacted by a French guy who was very close to Steve Jobs, and he remained there for quite a few years before leaving the United States and coming back to France. And I'm not sure what he does today, but anyway, he was making a tour, from what I understood, and visited a few companies in Europe with a purpose, was to, he had an agenda, and in France he wanted to meet us at Renault. I believe that he also wanted to meet people at Toyota, if I recall, and there was something else. And he came to the meeting. There was somebody else, by the way, who was there, even though he was more in a the interface was more between Steve Jobs and myself, but Fabio Filippini was there, and he immortalized the scene by taking a photograph, and has always been extraordinarily sad thereafter because he wasn't in the photograph. Poor old Fabio. Um, but in my book, I tell one of my books, I talk about this, and of course I had a drawing made which included Fabio, so that to rectify, he drew us this guy, a super designer, illustrator, Gernot Brach. He actually did the scene from the photographs, but
Fabio.
added Fabio in the picture, or in the illustration. The conversation was something which really fascinates me. It's the subject of how do you maintain creative process within a creative group. So here it goes. I'm Steve Jobs, and I like to surround myself with the best creative people, and money is no limit. I hire the best. I'm to make sure they come to us. I'll pay them 20%, 30% more than what they would get in another job. And so you get all these great individuals. But the phenomena nevertheless happens that for some reason you can get the best football players, the most expensive. There's a very good example, which is the Paris Saint-Germain, the Paris team. They have some of the most expensive players. They are unable to win because they haven't created a team, or because there is no, they are not able to work together, or they are not design driven or creatively driven, or whatever it is. And the question was, how do you maintain a creative team creative? So, you get all the best, you pay them a lot of money, you get them together, and, they work fantastically for some months, maybe a year or so. And then afterwards, there's always a kind of a dip. So are there any things that one should look at to maintain the high level of creativity? What are the challenges that you face, and so on and so forth? And this is, of course, this is absolutely up my street. This is sort of thing that has really, really motivated me, that I've thought about, and I've investigated. And so we had this really, really great conversation on this subject of maintaining the highest level of creativity within a creative group, within a design group.
And what is the solution to that? Oh, yes.
Before that, I have to tell you something. That I was the day that Steve Jobs died. It really hit me because well, first of all, because I admire the guy, irrespective of whatever. I just admire the guy. I love to listen to him, and so on and so forth. And I thought the guy was a genius. And I learned the information, that one day, and I was at dinner with some people who invited me, and I said, and I mentioned the fact that I had met Steve Jobs, and as soon as I just made that statement, and I thought, oh God, why did I say that? I mean, who's going to believe you? And it's not as if I could take my telephone and say, hey, look, nothing like that, So anyway, after dinner, when we went home, I felt really like a twit, and I said, well, I think there's a photo. Did we not take a photograph? It seems that we had taken one, but I hadn't kept anything. And then I got in contact with my former executive secretary, who was living in the United States, And she said, yeah, there is a photograph. Ask Fabio. So I said to Fabio, do you still have a photograph? Yeah, sure. And he sent it on to me. And now that is in my phone. It's there. Not that I mention very often that I met Steve
Immortalized.
Jobs, but anyway, that was it. So you say to me, yeah, so what's the answer? The answer we've already covered. Basically, it's the bad boys, having a team which is, made up of bad boys. It's an international team, okay? Because, for example, I'll give you an example, and you'll have to get me back on track because I might forget. But when I was working at Renault on Frenchness, what is Frenchness? When we think about the influence of French carrosserie from before the war, what was then called the flamboyant French carrosserie. And in France, there were basically two schools. There was the flamboyant carrossier, like Figoni Polaski and so on, and all those chapeaux and so on. And then there were more the futurists, the modernists, I would say. And they were the guys who people who were influenced by Le Corbusier, amongst the architect Le Corbusier, but others, and they corresponded in many ways to that spirit, which was that of the Bauhaus, and they had a name which was called l'Esprit Nouveau, the new spirit, and so it was a movement. And these two movements, the most important was the flamboyant, stylish thing, and the other one were the ones who were thinking in terms of architecture, in terms of finding new concept. The most important, I would say, is Voisin. Voisin was very much in that. The automobile Voisin was very much in that field. And so now I get back to this idea, and I've lost my track. I told you I was going to
No, it's okay.
lose my track.
I do that all the time.
But yeah, I remember.
Okay.
I remember. So basically, it's I go back to this notion of international, and I found that, for example, the guy who really understood the best about Frenchness was not a Frenchman, but it was in fact a guy who was Canadian.
Right.
And let me tell you a little story of a man. It's just to show you when you look from outside, we're in the same world, looking from the outside. When you have somebody who came to France from outside, from another one, he would look at things differently, because the French, they live all the time and they don't see things. I mean, you just don't. I'm in a fantastic place. I live here with a beautiful scene, but if I stay too long, I don't look at the scene anymore.
Yeah,
Okay,
yeah.
so that's the problem in life. So anyway, there is this little story, which is kind of a parable, which is a man. He's walking along a little river, a little stream, and it's very, very, very hot, and he's thinking, well, it might be nice to, take a dip, to cool down. Then he said, yeah, but it might be really, really cold. I might get, concussion or whatever. So he sees a little fish swimming along the bank. So he leans over and he says, hey, fish, what's the water like? And the fish says, water? What water? Okay?
Yeah.
What water? Because the fish doesn't know it's in water.
Right.
He is like the French people in France,
Right.
So that's the idea. So
yes.
What the answers, going back to what are the answers to make sure a team remains creative, is the bad boys, an international team who have outside vision, who look differently. Okay, it's also the way that you organize to have people continuously looking at the outside world by the transmissions, to transmit as well knowledge, to transmit the outside world inside the creative group. And it's because of this stimuli that you're going to be able to maintain your design team at a peak, So this has been my theory, which has worked for quite a long time. Sometimes it failed miserably, but but basically I still feel very very strongly about that. and I still apply it today. I mean, I still doing yacht design. Yeah.
I think that's great advice, and I love the parable about the fish, because I like, as an outside, I've always been an outside. I mean, especially in my adult life, I'm born and bred South African, like through and through. 18 years old, I get on a plane to London with like 200 quid in my pocket, and the adventure kind of starts, But like from there, at every given point, I've always been an outsider. And the thing with that is that you kind of, you always look at things differently, as you've just highlighted. So it's not just about the French not recognizing their environment, but like, the English didn't necessarily recognize the environment either, and then you go to Sweden and you see, okay, you constantly
Likewise.
analyzing these different things, and therein also, often lies great opportunity, and,
Yes.
yeah, so that it's great to be an outsider sometimes.
It's in fact essential. But the thing about not understanding what Frenchness was is not just limited to the French within their own country. I think that anybody who lives in a country for many years will start not looking at its environment and maybe lose sight of some of the great things. It's back. I go back to my to my outside scene. I
Yes.
live. Tomorrow I'm going back to Paris, and I will go for 3 weeks? I think no, fortnight. To Paris, and then I'll be back here. And when I
Yes,
arrive
yes,
here,
yes.
I say, my God, look at that scene.
I know,
So
I know.
it's continuously being stimulated.
That's the importance in changing scenery. I get the same thing. Like if I mean, I think particularly as a kid you do anyway, but you take that environment that I lived in South Africa, in the Garden Route, for example, you take it for granted. And then every year I come back and I'm like, wow, this is amazing. And then after a period of time, I'm like, okay, I've had my time here. I'm ready to go back and, work on the things that I need to work on, and then you come back and that cycle. I mean, I think I've not really spent a lot of time in France, but I think France is very interesting to me from that perspective. When you look at and South Africa is obviously the same with this like extreme contrast in landscape. If you compare Bordeaux to Nice, for example, and you've got the mountains as well, the Alps, and to be able to have the luxury, because it is a luxury, to be able to move between these places. I mean, it's just probably one of the greatest gifts in life, really.
Oh, it's very stimulating. Yeah, it's stimulating. Yeah, for sure.
Magic. Patrick, I don't want to forget this, because this person was actually the person that connected us, Michael Bartley. He told this I was almost in tears when he told me this, because it was just such a beautiful story. But he knew, like, from 5 years old, that he wanted to become a car designer, and he turns around to his parents at 7 or 8 or 7 years old, and he's like, this is Patrick Le Quément. He's the design director of Renault, and I'm going to draw an image. I'm gonna send him my designs, and maybe he doesn't respond to me, but I'm gonna do it anyway. You had the initiative to do it, and he sends this drawing off, and you not only do you respond to them, but you actually invite him into the studio, and he ends up celebrating his 8th birthday in the studio. And you guys set up
a surprise for him, right?
And it's one of the most beautiful things I've ever heard in my life. And there was no social media at the time. There was no gain for you or the company or the department or anything. And I have to say, it's one of the most heartwarming things I've ever heard in my life, And it was such a beautiful story. And I think it's, I'm getting emotional just thinking about it. It was a very cool thing that you guys
Let me
did.
tell you the reason. Let, well, let me tell you what happened. When I finished my studies at Birmingham, I wrote close to 100 letters um, to try to find a job. Okay, you have to remember in those days, getting into the automobile industry was pretty damn hard because in a styling department, you might have 10 people or 15 people or less. Okay, so getting a job was kind of difficult. You had to have a bit of luck. And what happened is I wrote these letters, and in fact, I only had three answers. Okay, out of 100. Um, and okay, that's a story in itself. And I had an opportunity to be hired by Raymond Loewy, who had this industrial design company, but they also did so many things in Paris. And then I had another offer from Simca, at the time automobile manufacturer, who had been bought by Chrysler. Now Raymond Loewy, they paid so badly that I had to make a choice between you had to make a choice between either having a flat or being able to feed yourself. So that was kind of limited to Simca, and Simca had a pretty decent salary, which meant that I could actually feed myself and find lodging. And so this is where I started. But I promised myself that whenever I would be in that kind of position, I would always answer to whoever would write to us. And I made it a law when I was at Renault that you couldn't make people wait longer than a week before answering them. When this kid Michael sent this drawing, I thought they were really interesting, and then we schemed behind his back with his parents. They lived in Alsace, away from Paris. That they would bring him for his birthday, not telling him anything. And thereupon this little kid, he arrives at the techno center, this huge building, and he comes into the design center and everything's been prepared and we have a meeting together, and then he's handed over to one of the studio manager and spends the whole day drawing and so on. But I could tell the guy was, not only was he enthusiastic, but that he had talent. So basically we established, he would send us, and then we would correct, we would give him art materials, stuff which you couldn't buy. At the time you could buy that in shops. Of course, Amazon didn't exist, and in fact, I followed him all the way through to college. And when he, I don't know whether Michael told you that, but when he actually got his diploma, he came to my house with his parents, and we opened a bottle of champagne, and it was really nice. But I've always done that. I've always followed the kids. It's just so important. The experience I had, of writing all these letters, and people don't actually even send you an answer. Not.
Yeah.
I mean,
Yeah.
nothing.
Yeah.
Just
Yeah.
appalling.
I mean, to go back to your, it's not quite the same thing, but it's somehow similar. Your mantra of luck is not what you get, but what you do with it. In the same respect, you could also have the attitude, well, I didn't get a response from anybody, so why, like, screw that sort of thing, But you chose to do the opposite, and that's a beautiful thing. It's really, really, that was an amazing thing. And we talked as well, and I think one of the great things, and to his credit as well, is that he kind of still paved his own path. From what I understand, he wasn't necessarily hounding you to come into Renault, and you guys have never worked together professionally, and therefore you have this quite interesting and unadulterated friendship, and I think there's
Sure.
also a lot of
And we
a lot of
still,
value in
we
that.
still exchange, we still exchange together. I have I have a feeling that when he graduated, we had a hiring freeze at the time. All through my career, I've had these periods where there's a hiring freeze. But he was just so damn good. And I mean, he got a job
Yeah,
immediately.
yeah, yeah, yeah.
Um, Immediately. He was just so damn good. Yeah, I mean, he still is damn good.
Absolutely.
Very much
Yeah,
so.
absolutely. Incredibly. I mean, he reached out to me and we started talking, and he was like, "Oh, you should really get Patrick on." And I was like, "Oh, it'd be great, wouldn't it? Like, should I just get Barack Obama on as well while I'm at it?" And he's and he's like, "Well, actually, I know him, and that's how it all happened." And we had a great chat as well. And yeah, what a guy,
Mm.
hell of a guy. I
Yeah,
guess
very good. And had a
yeah,
great career.
absolutely, and I think
Mm.
and he said, he acknowledged as well that there was, I mean, it's somehow there is luck involved with him kind of realizing, knowing at a young age so single-mindedly that this is the thing that he's going to do, and I mean, it's
Mm.
unquestionable. His raw talent is undeniable, but he knew from that age, and he's just been able to consistently build on
Yeah,
this year after year after year. So
yeah,
by the time he gets to 18, I can imagine that his work by then already, it's like, he's got like 13 years of
mm,
experience, but
yeah,
he's learned how to draw
yeah.
properly, which is just
And also
it's
being coached,
and be coached as well.
and also being
Absolutely,
coached.
yeah. Well, this is yeah, absolutely, and he recognized this as well. And I think when to go back to that experience of his birthday, I mean, to be able to see inside a design studio and say, like, this is this is a real thing, and then to meet you guys and have feedback on his work, I mean, it's invaluable. Absolutely. There's
Yeah.
no two ways about it. Patrick, I guess we should probably start wrapping up soon. I
Mhm.
the last kind of thing that I wanted to kind of just touch on. I mean, we don't have to go down a whole big rabbit hole about it, but
Mhm.
I spoke to Axel about kind of Renault being the quote unquote gold standard for show cars, and I know that this was something that you championed, and you basically you made it part of it wasn't like a nice to have. It was like, no, this is very much an investment in our strategy and in our future. Can you tell me what that conversation looked like with your boss at the time, saying we need to spend a few $100,000 euros on this thing that
Yeah.
is not necessarily going to be sold, and how you convinced him?
Okay. Uh, when I joined the company, they were doing some experimental cars, where it was very much technically oriented, and the first the first prototype, I guess, which looked as if it had some design input, in reality was something which was called Megan, which I was not in charge of. I was there; it was being done, but they had a director in charge of this project, and in fact, the man who was in charge of this project is the fellow who eventually became the director of the Twingo program. But he very much operated on his own because he was that kind of guy. But the first real concept cars, and they are identified because of their code, which was Z01, Z02, and so on and so forth. So the first real concept car is a result of my sending a note to my boss. I did not work for the president. I worked for his number two. Already design was not answering to engineering, but it was answering to the executive vice president in charge of R&D. And I sent him a note, which I sent a copy to the president, which was a bit cocky, of me, but where I described the process, what I was proposing, knowing that there was no such a thing as policies of doing concept cars. Surely the Italians were doing show models, regularly. It was often not necessarily as real prototypes. A lot of them were just mock-ups. But I made a proposition of two concepts. One which was appealing to the emotion, which was the Laguna Roadster, and the second was this crazy idea that I had to do a very intelligently thought out mid-van, a van underneath the Espace in a segment which didn't exist, and that became the Scenic. Okay, so I had made a little dossier, and I had got illustrations to support this dossier. Both of the illustrations, by the way, were done by Jean-Pierre Plouet, who is today the head of Stellantis design. Absolutely thoroughly brilliant individual. I mean, one of the best designers I've ever met. Not sure whether he's not the best. Probably.
Wow.
Anyway, we had this dossier. We presented it to management, and they agreed. They said, "Oh, okay." And one of the reasons behind it was, at the time, I arrived with this new mission. Instill creativity and sort of intelligence into the new concepts, going back to the roots of what Renault was all about. But to get a model into production, it took 4 years. So it meant that I was going to be staying 4 years, saying each time I had an interview, "Oh yeah, we're doing some really inventive stuff. You just have to wait." And so I said that we had to start communication from this point, on. We had to have a planned, what you call that, or a plan to exhibit these projects, which were going to contribute to the change of image of the company. And so this is how it developed over the years, and the concept car program were in fact very much design oriented. We elected what we felt was right. We worked with a great individual in product planning, but he was very much, he lived most of the time in design, and his name is Jean-Marie Souquet. And we sort of proposed each year, and we came out regularly with these concept cars, and we had some extraordinary designers like Stéphane Janin and so many
incredible
super designers, and it was, well, as I said, I was immensely frustrated how slow the company was. I mean, the automobile industry was slow by comparison to the Japanese, and I kept saying that to the president, and then the president got fed up, and of my, talking about that, and I was saying that, in Ford, we were very much influenced by Japan, and we had lots of talks with Mazda, who was, part of the Ford, to work on reducing time to market. And so he appointed me head of the reduction of time to market. And I had a cross-disciplinary team with senior members from all the organization. And lo and behold, a stylist was in charge of that. Can you imagine? Some of these engineering people said, this president has gone, he's gone off the rocks. I mean, he's appointed a stylist to run this most important thing. And we did it, we actually reduced time to market by 1/3, and it was also part of the challenge that I had when I joined the company, because this happened in the second year that I was there, to actually prove that designers also were thinking people. So, it all contributed to the overall image that I was building up.
Well, I think the results speak for themselves. I mean, it's absolutely incredible the legacy that you've created up until now, and it's ongoing. So, I mean, there's nothing really else to say about that. I think you've smashed it. You've done all right.
Okay. Hey, thank you so much.
Patrick,
Well,
do you want
great.
to before we wrap up, do you want to talk a little bit about design?
Yes, absolutely. We created a school almost 9 years ago with somebody called Maurice Larriquière, who originally was one of the founder of Strat College. Strat College is very well known in the automobile design. There's an awful lot of designers who have been trained and formed there, many, many designers. So Maurice and somebody called Marc Van Peteghem, who's a naval architect, and myself, we decided to create a design school. It's on the French Riviera, and it was created to change the design approach to anything which is related to sustainable design. And so we are called Design, the Sustainable Design School. We're an international school. We teach in English, and we do unbelievable projects. And continuously we work with companies outside, be they international, some in the automobile companies. Like, we have a particularly close relationship with Toyota, but we've done projects, with BMW, Renault, and others, but also people in other fields. And our graduates, they go out and they're getting jobs. So we are not producing people to go on the dough line. They actually get jobs, and we feel it's the future. We think that we're developing a new breed of designers who will really contribute to the world design scene in the future.
Incredible. That sounds. I think that, and you've chosen a great location as well, south of France.
Oh yeah, makes it it makes a difference. Yeah.
Patrick,
Sure.
I'm going to end up with a last quote of yours. I'm not gonna. We usually end off on advice, but I feel like you've already given so much advice. I want you to unpack this. This is another one of your quotes. What's important is not to become king, but rather to build a kingdom.
Yes. I remember I said that to my president, Louis Schweitzer, who's a very erudite individual, very cultured, and he heard me say that, and he said, "God, that's beautiful. Where does that come from?" I said, "No, it doesn't come from anywhere. I created that. This is what I believe. My mission, my whole life's mission, is not to become king, but to actually build a kingdom. I want to build design, and so irrespective of what happens to me, what is important is to build this kingdom. And it's the kingdom of design that designers really should have a major role in the future in society overall, not just the automobile industry, everywhere, because this creative process is what's going to enable us to come outside of these crises, or get out of these terrible crises that we have to face, some of which are totally dramatic. But I really feel this is a world where designers can really have a large influence. So yes, I feel wholeheartedly responsible, and I feel this phrase really represents what I've tried to do in my life.
Patrick, I'm speechless. Thank you so much for this, for your time, and for being so thoughtful in your answers and your discussion, and for doing this. So thank you so much.
Thank you.